The city glittered with winter magic. Snow dusted the cobblestone streets. Christmas markets filled the air with the scent of roasted chestnuts and mulled wine. The grand Habsburg architecture stood elegant against the gray winter sky. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. For Hermine Braunsteiner, a 27-year-old secretary, it had been an ordinary Monday. She'd finished her shift at the textile factory where she worked in the administrative offices. Her colleagues described her as diligent, punctual, always impeccably dressed despite modest means. Hermine was engaged to be married. Her fiancé, Franz, worked as a clerk at a bank. They were saving money for their wedding, planned for the following spring. Everything about Hermine's life was ordinary, predictable, safe. That evening, she left the factory at her usual time, around 6:30 p.m. She waved goodbye to her supervisor, pulled her wool coat tight against the December cold, and headed toward the tramway stop on Favoriten Street. The number 71 tram would take her home to her small apartment in the 10th district. It was a route she took every single day. 15 stops. 23 minutes. A journey so familiar she could do it with her eyes closed. Several witnesses later recalled seeing her at the tram stop. She stood under the lamppost, stamping her feet to keep warm, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She seemed perfectly normal. Not anxious. Not afraid. Just another working woman heading home after a long day. The tram arrived at 6:47 p.m. Hermine boarded through the rear entrance, as was customary for those without monthly passes. She paid her fare to the conductor, a middle-aged man named Otto Muller, who would later testify that she seemed in good spirits. The tram was moderately crowded. Workers heading home. Shoppers returning from the markets. The usual evening commuters. Hermine found a seat near the back, by the window. She placed her small handbag on her lap and stared out at the passing streets, lit by gas lamps and shop windows. The tram rattled through Vienna's winter evening. Stop after stop. Passengers got on and off. Hermine remained in her seat, her face reflected in the dark window glass. But something was wrong. Several passengers would later report noticing a man. He'd boarded at the third stop, on Riumenplatz. Tall, wearing a dark overcoat and a fedora pulled low over his face. He didn't sit down. Instead, he stood near the rear of the tram, one hand gripping the overhead rail, the other buried in his coat pocket. His eyes, multiple witnesses agreed, never left Hermine. The tram continued its route through the darkening streets. At the 8th stop, Südtirolerplatz, something happened that would change everything. The tram doors opened. A few passengers got off. The conductor rang the bell, signaling departure. And then someone screamed. It was a woman near the front of the tram. She was screaming and pointing toward the back. The conductor pulled the emergency brake. The tram screeched to a halt. Other passengers began shouting. Chaos erupted. Because there, slumped against the window in the back seat, was Hermine Braunsteiner. A knife protruded from her chest. Blood soaked the front of her wool coat, spreading in a dark stain across the fabric. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. And the man in the dark overcoat and fedora was gone. He had vanished into the Vienna night, leaving behind a young woman's body and a mystery that would grip the city for months to come. The police were called immediately. Within minutes, officers swarmed the tramway. They cordoned off the scene. They took statements from the traumatized passengers. But the killer had disappeared like smoke. No one had seen him leave. No one could give a clear description of his face. The fedora had obscured his features too well. All they knew was that somewhere in Vienna, a murderer walked free. And this was only the beginning of one of the most perplexing criminal cases in Austrian history. Detective Inspector Karl Richter arrived at the scene within 30 minutes of the murder. At 43 years old, Richter was one of Vienna's most experienced homicide detectives. He'd served in the Imperial Army during the Great War, surviving the brutality of the Eastern Front. After the war, he'd joined the Vienna Police Department, bringing with him a methodical mind and an unflinching ability to confront violence. But even Richter was shaken by what he found on the number 71 tram. The body of Hermine Braunsteiner remained exactly as the passengers had found her. The medical examiner hadn't yet arrived. She sat upright in her seat, the knife still embedded in her chest, her handbag still clutched in her lap. Her face, Richter would later write in his report, bore an expression of complete surprise. As if she'd been struck so suddenly that she hadn't even had time to register fear. The knife itself was unremarkable. A common kitchen knife with a wooden handle, the kind you could buy at any market stall in Vienna. No distinguishing marks. No manufacturer's stamp. Utterly generic. The weapon of convenience, not premeditation, Richter initially thought. But he was wrong. The medical examiner, Dr. Heinrich Gross, arrived shortly after 8 p.m. He was a precise man, clinical in his assessments, never given to speculation. After a preliminary examination, he turned to Richter with a grim expression. "This was not a crime of passion," Dr. Gross said. "Look at the angle of entry. The depth." Meanwhile, other officers were interviewing the passengers who'd been on the tram. Their testimonies painted a disturbing picture. The man in the dark overcoat had boarded at Riumenplatz. He'd stood near Hermine for at least 5 stops. Several passengers noticed him staring at her, but no one thought much of it at the time. Vienna trams were crowded. People stared into space. It seemed normal. No one saw the actual stabbing. This was the most puzzling aspect of the crime. The tram had been moderately crowded. Hermine had been sitting by the window, but there were people nearby. How had someone stabbed her without anyone seeing it happen? One passenger, an elderly woman named Frau Schmidt, provided a crucial detail. "There was a moment," she said, her hands shaking as she spoke to the police. "Just before the tram reached Sutteroller Platz. The lights flickered. You know how they do sometimes on the old trams? They went out for maybe 3-4 seconds. Everyone complained. And when they came back on, people started getting ready for their stop. No one was paying attention to anything else. 3 to 4 seconds. That's all it had taken. In that brief moment of darkness, the killer had struck. One precise thrust. And then he'd melted back into the crowd of passengers, just another commuter preparing to exit at the next stop. By the time the body was discovered, he'd already slipped off the tram and disappeared into the Vienna streets. It was a crime of stunning audacity and cold precision. Richter ordered his men to canvass the area around Sutteroller Platz. They questioned shopkeepers, taxi drivers, anyone who might have seen a man in a dark overcoat fleeing the scene. Nothing. The killer had vanished completely. The next step was to investigate the victim. Who was Hermine Braunsteiner? Why would anyone want her dead? Richter and his partner, Detective Otto Neumann, visited Hermine's apartment late that night. It was a modest one-room flat in a working-class neighborhood. Neat. Clean. Sparsely furnished. They found letters from her fiancé, Franz Kovacs. Love letters, full of plans for their future together. They found her diary, where she wrote about her daily routine, her hopes for marriage, her dreams of saving enough money to buy a small house someday. There was nothing suspicious. No evidence of debts. No indication of dangerous associations. No secret lovers. No gambling problems. Hermine Braunsteiner appeared to be exactly what she seemed, an ordinary working woman living an ordinary life. Which made her murder all the more baffling. The next day, Richter interviewed Franz Kovacs. The young man was devastated, barely able to speak through his grief. He had an airtight alibi, He'd been at work at the bank until 7 p.m., with dozens of witnesses to confirm it. Hermine's colleagues at the textile factory were equally shocked. She had no enemies, they insisted. She was well-liked, quiet, kept to herself mostly. Never caused trouble. Never argued with anyone. Dead end after dead end. By the end of the second day, Richter had a murder weapon that could have come from anywhere, a victim with no apparent motive for being killed, and a killer who had committed the crime in front of dozens of witnesses without anyone seeing his face or understanding how he'd done it. The Vienna newspapers were having a field day. "Phantom killer strikes on tramway," screamed the headlines. "Mysterious death of innocent secretary. Vienna police baffled by brazen murder." The public was terrified. If a woman could be murdered on a crowded tram in the middle of Vienna, then no one was safe. Richter felt the pressure mounting. The police commissioner wanted results. The newspapers wanted answers. The public wanted justice. But Richter had nothing. Not yet. On the third day, something changed. A letter arrived at police headquarters. It was addressed to Detective Inspector Karl Richter. No return address. Posted from somewhere in Vienna's first district. Richter opened it with a letter opener, his hands steady despite the sense of foreboding creeping up his spine. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant. And the message chilled him to his core. "Dear Inspector Richter. You are looking for the man who killed Hermine Braunsteiner. You will not find him because you are asking the wrong questions. Hermine was not innocent. She was not what she appeared to be. She deserved what happened to her. And she is not the last. There are others who deserve the same fate. You cannot stop what is coming. Sincerely. A friend of justice." Richter stared at the letter for a long moment. Then he called for his entire team. Because this was no longer just a murder investigation. This was the beginning of something far more sinister. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop your location in the comments. And if you're finding this case as gripping as I am, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. This investigation is about to take a very dark turn. The letter from the self-proclaimed friend of justice changed everything. Detective Inspector Richter immediately ordered handwriting analysis. The letter was sent to the police laboratory, where experts would examine the paper, the ink, the penmanship, looking for any clue to the writer's identity. Meanwhile, Richter couldn't shake the implications of the message. Hermine was not innocent. She deserved what happened to her. She is not the last. These weren't the ravings of a madman. The writing was too controlled, too deliberate. This was someone who believed, with absolute conviction, that Hermine's murder was justified. But what could a 27-year-old secretary possibly have done to deserve being stabbed to death on a tramway? Richter intensified his investigation into Hermine's background. He interviewed everyone who'd known her, friends, family, neighbors, former classmates. He went through her personal effects with forensic precision, looking for anything that might reveal a hidden life. Still nothing. The handwriting expert's report came back inconclusive. The writing was educated, suggesting someone with at least a secondary education. The author was likely right-handed, probably middle-aged based on the formation of certain letters. But beyond these basic observations, there was little to go on. The paper was common stationery available at hundreds of shops across Vienna. The ink was standard fountain pen ink. No fingerprints on the letter, the writer had been careful. Days passed. The city remained on edge. Women were afraid to ride the tramways alone. Newspapers ran daily updates, even when there was nothing new to report. Then, on December 18th, 12 days after Hermine's murder, it happened again. The victim this time was Margarete Schoen, a 32-year-old music teacher. She lived in the 6th district and gave piano lessons to children of wealthy families. She was found in her apartment by one of her students' mothers who had come to drop off payment for the month's lessons. The door was unlocked. Margarethi lay on the floor of her sitting room, a knife protruding from her chest. The same type of knife. The same precise placement. The same instant death. But this time, the killer had left something behind. Pinned to Margarethi's dress was a note. Written in the same elegant handwriting as the letter to Richter. Margarethi Shawn was a deceiver. She pretended to be virtuous while corrupting the innocent. Justice has been served. There are still others. The reckoning continues. Richter was called to the scene immediately. As he examined Margarethi's body and read the note, a horrifying realization settled over him like a shroud. This wasn't a random killer. This was someone on a mission. Someone who believed they were righting wrongs, punishing people for perceived sins. A vigilante. The question was, what had Hermine and Margarethi done to earn a place on this killer's list? Richter's investigation into Margarethi's life revealed surprising information. While she presented herself as a respectable music teacher, she had a secret. For the past 3 years, she'd been having an affair with one of her students' fathers, a wealthy merchant named Leopold Krauss who was married with 4 children. The affair was discreet, but not entirely secret. Several people knew about it, including Krauss's wife, who had chosen to look the other way rather than face the scandal of divorce. Was this the corruption of the innocent the killer referred to? And what about Hermine? Richter went back through all his notes on Hermine Braunsteiner, looking for anything he might have missed. He found it in an interview with one of her former colleagues, a comment that had seemed insignificant at the time. Oh, Hermine was very proper now, but there were rumors about her before she got engaged. Something about a married man at her previous job. But that was years ago, and she'd changed. She was a good girl. Richter tracked down the details. 3 years earlier, before working at the textile factory, Hermine had been employed at a law firm. There, she'd had an affair with one of the senior partners, a married man with 2 children. When the partner's wife discovered the affair, there was a scandal. Hermine was quietly dismissed. The partner kept his job. Hermine had been 24 at the time. Young, perhaps naive, certainly making a mistake. But she'd moved on. Found a new job. Met Franz. Became engaged. Built a respectable life. Until someone decided her past sins required punishment. The pattern was becoming clear. Both victims were women who had been involved with married men. Both had, in the killer's twisted logic, corrupted the innocent or deceived others about their virtue. Both had been judged, convicted, and executed by someone who saw themselves as an arbiter of morality. Richter felt sick. He was dealing with a moral crusader. Someone who believed they were doing God's work, cleansing Vienna of women they deemed immoral. And according to the killer's own words, there were more names on the list. The question was, how many more? And how could Richter stop murders when he had no idea who the next victim might be, or when the killer would strike? Vienna's police commissioner called an emergency meeting. The press was going wild. The public was panicking. 2 women had been murdered in 12 days, and the killer was taunting the police with notes. "We need to warn the public," the commissioner said. "Women need to be on their guard." Warn them about what? Richter replied, frustration evident in his voice. That they might be murdered if they've had an affair? That someone has appointed themselves judge and executioner over private moral failings? We need to do something, Inspector. I need more time. More resources. Permission to expand the investigation. The commissioner granted it all. Richter assembled a team of 20 detectives. They began a massive undertaking, creating a list of women in Vienna who might fit the killer's criteria. Women who were known to have affairs, or reputations that might make them targets. It was an impossible task. Vienna was a city of nearly 2 million people. The list could potentially include thousands of women. Meanwhile, the killer remained silent. No more letters. No more murders. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The city began to breathe easier. Perhaps it was over. Perhaps the killer had been scared off by the increased police presence. Richter didn't believe it for a moment. Someone who had killed twice with such cold precision wasn't going to stop. They were simply waiting. Choosing their next victim. Savoring the fear they'd created. And then, on January 8, 1927, the third victim was discovered. Anna Fischer was 29 years old, a seamstress who worked from her home in the 9th district. She specialized in alterations and custom dressmaking for middle-class clients. Her body was found by her landlady, who had come to collect the monthly rent. The door to Anna's workshop was ajar. Inside, Anna lay across her cutting table, a knife in her chest, her blood staining the fabric she'd been working on. Pinned to her collar was another note. Anna Fischer lived a double life. By day, a modest seamstress. By night, a companion to men who betrayed their vows. She profited from sin. She has been judged. The purification of Vienna continues. Detective Inspector Richter stood in Anna's workshop, fighting the rage building inside him. 3 women. 3 precise murders. 3 notes condemning victims for their moral failings. He ordered his team to investigate Anna's background immediately. Within hours, they discovered her secret. Anna had indeed been living a double life. While her seamstress business was legitimate, she also earned money as an escort. Nothing illegal, she wasn't a prostitute in the formal sense. But she accompanied wealthy married men to operas, dinners, social events. And sometimes, those evenings ended in private apartments. She was discreet. Professional. She never caused scandals or demanded more than her agreed-upon fees. But in the killer's eyes, she was guilty. Guilty of profiting from sin. Guilty of enabling married men to betray their wives. Guilty enough to die. Richter gathered his team for an emergency briefing. "We have a pattern now," he said, pinning photographs of all 3 victims to the board in the conference room. 3 women. All killed with the same type of knife. All stabbed once, precisely, through the heart. All involved in some way with extramarital affairs. But why these specific women? Detective Newman asked. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of women in Vienna who could fit this profile. Why these 3? It was the right question. And Richter didn't have an answer. He studied the photographs of the victims. Hermine Bronsteiner. Secretary. 27 years old. Killed on a tramway. Margarethe Schahn. Music teacher. 32 years old. Killed in her apartment. Anna Fischer. Seamstress. 29 years old. Killed in her workshop. Different ages. Different professions. Different neighborhoods. What connected them? There has to be a link, Richter said. Some connection we're not seeing. Someone who knew all 3 women. Someone who knew their secrets. His team began the painstaking work of cross-referencing the victims' lives. Did they shop at the same stores? Attend the same churches? Have mutual acquaintances? Visit the same doctors? Days of investigation yielded no clear connection. Meanwhile, the killer's notes were analyzed by Vienna's leading criminal psychologist, Dr. Ernst Becker. Dr. Becker was a pioneer in the emerging field of criminal profiling. He'd studied under Sigmund Freud and had consulted on several high-profile cases across Europe. His analysis was both illuminating and disturbing. Your killer, Dr. Becker told Richter, is highly intelligent and well-educated. The language in the notes is formal, almost literary. The handwriting suggests discipline and control. We already knew that. But consider the psychology, Dr. Becker continued. This person sees themselves as a crusader, yes, but more than that, as a corrector of moral imbalance. Notice the phrasing, justice has been served, the purification of Vienna continues. These aren't the words of someone consumed by rage. This is calculated. Methodical. Why women? Richter asked. If he's so concerned with extramarital affairs, why not target the married men involved? Dr. Becker smiled grimly. An excellent question. And the answer tells us a great deal about our killer. He, or she, we shouldn't assume gender, blames women for tempting men. In the killer's worldview, men are weak, easily led astray. Women are the true sinners, the corrupting influences. So we're looking for someone with a deep-seated misogyny. More specifically, someone who has been personally wounded by a woman's infidelity or perceived immorality. This feels personal, Inspector. This isn't an abstract crusade. Someone has suffered, and now they're exacting revenge on women they see as similar to whoever hurt them. This opened new investigative avenues. Richter's team began looking for men whose wives had left them for other men. Men who had been publicly humiliated by infidelity. Men who might harbor such intense resentment that it had twisted into this murderous campaign. They found dozens of possibilities. Angry husbands. Jilted fiancés. Men whose families had been destroyed by affairs. But none of them connected to all three victims. And meanwhile, time was running out. If the pattern held, another woman would die soon. Richter made a controversial decision. He held a press conference and released specific details about the case that had been kept from the public. He described the killer's pattern. The type of victims. The notes. The methodology. If you are a woman who has been involved in an extramarital relationship, Richter told the assembled reporters, you may be in danger. Please contact the police. We can offer protection. It was a desperate gamble. The press conference caused a sensation. Within days, hundreds of women came forward, some anonymously, admitting to affairs and begging for protection. The police couldn't possibly protect them all. But Richter hoped that the publicity might have another effect. It might force the killer to pause, to reconsider, to make a mistake. He was wrong. 5 days after the press conference, on January 15th, the fourth victim was found. This time, the killer had escalated. Claudia Berger was 26 years old, a librarian at the Vienna University Library. Unlike the previous victims, Claudia wasn't found immediately after her death. Her body was discovered in the basement storage room of the library, 3 days after she'd been reported missing by her sister. The delay was significant. The killer had had time. Time to stage the scene. Time to send a message. When Richter arrived at the library and descended to the basement, he found something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Claudia's body had been arranged with grotesque care. She sat in a chair, her hands folded in her lap, the knife still in her chest. Around her, on the floor, the killer had used her blood to write a message. For sins cleansed. Vienna must be purified. The guilty will all pay. Justice never sleeps. The letters were large, deliberate, written with what appeared to be a paintbrush dipped in the victim's blood. Several police officers who witnessed the scene had to leave to vomit. Even Richter, hardened by years of investigating violence, felt his stomach turn. This was different from the previous murders. This wasn't just efficient execution. This was ritual. Theater. A performance designed to shock and terrify. The killer was growing bolder. More confident. More theatrical. Richter examined the scene with Dr. Gross, the medical examiner. Time of death? Richter asked. Based on decomposition and the temperature down here, I'd estimate approximately 72 hours ago. That would be January 12th, sometime in the evening. The same day Richter had held his press conference. The killer had murdered Claudia as a direct response to the police going public. It was a statement, "You cannot stop me." The investigation into Claudia's background revealed the now familiar pattern. She had been having an affair with a married professor at the university. They'd been discreet, meeting in his office after hours, at quiet cafes on the outskirts of town. The affair had ended 2 months earlier when the professor's wife had become suspicious. But apparently, ending the affair hadn't saved Claudia. In the killer's eyes, she'd already committed her sin. The sentence had already been passed. Richter returned to headquarters and stared at his board. 4 victims now. 4 women murdered for their involvement with married men. The gaps between murders were decreasing. Hermine to Margarethi, 12 days. Margarethi to Anna, 21 days. Anna to Claudia, 7 days. The killer was accelerating. And the theatrical staging of Claudia's body suggested something even more troubling. The killer was enjoying this. What had started as a cold, efficient campaign of moral punishment was evolving into something more sadistic. The notes were analyzed again. The blood writing introduced a new element. The handwriting was the same, confirmation that all 4 murders were connected to the same killer. But the tone had changed. Earlier notes were almost apologetic in their formality. Justice has been served. Now the language was becoming grandiose, the guilty will all pay. Justice never sleeps. The killer was losing whatever restraint they'd once had. Dr. Becker, the criminal psychologist, revised his profile. The killer is devolving, he told Richter. The murders started as cold, calculated executions. Now we're seeing ritualistic elements, theatrical staging, grandiose messaging. This suggests the killer is losing touch with reality, becoming consumed by their mission. Is that good or bad for us? Richter asked. Both. Good because when killers become more theatrical, they tend to make mistakes, leave more evidence, take more risks. Bad because it means the murders may become more frequent and more violent. That night, another letter arrived at police headquarters. Same elegant handwriting. Same formal tone. But the content was more disturbing than ever. Dear Inspector Richter, I read about your press conference with great interest. You think you can stop me by warning my targets? You cannot. They deserve what is coming to them. I know you are looking for me. You will never find me. I move through Vienna like a ghost. I see everything. I know everyone's secrets. There are so many guilty women in this city. So many who pretend to be virtuous while living in sin. So many who destroy families and corrupt the innocent. I am not a murderer, Inspector. I am an executioner. I serve a higher justice than your laws. Claudia Berger was number 4. But there are more. Many more. You asked women to come forward and seek protection. How naive. Do you really think you can protect them all? Do you really think you can stop what must be done? Vienna is a cesspool of moral corruption. I am the cleansing fire. Watch carefully, Inspector. The next one will be soon. Very soon. Your adversary. The Purifier. The letter was signed with a new name. No longer a friend of justice. Now, the Purifier. The killer had given himself a title. An identity. A purpose. Richter knew this was bad. Very bad. Serial killers who named themselves, who created personas, who viewed their crimes as a mission, those were the most dangerous kind. They didn't stop. They escalated until they were caught or killed. Richter called an emergency meeting with the police commissioner and the mayor of Vienna. "We need to increase patrols on all tramways," Richter said. "We need officers in plain clothes riding the routes. We need to monitor known locations where women meet with married men, hotels, cafes, private clubs." "You're talking about enormous resources," the commissioner replied. "I'm talking about saving lives." The resources were allocated. For the next week, Vienna's police force operated at maximum capacity. Undercover officers rode tramways. Stakeouts were established at hotels. Women who had come forward were given escorts. The newspapers ran daily updates, keeping the public in a constant state of fear. And the killer remained silent. No new murders. No new letters. 7 days passed. Then 10. Then 14. Hope began to grow that maybe, just maybe, the increased police presence had scared the killer into hiding. Richter didn't share that hope. He'd been studying serial killers from other countries. Cases from London, Paris, Berlin. He knew that silence didn't mean safety. It meant planning. And on January 30th, his worst fears were confirmed. Not with one murder, but with two. The morning of January 30th, 1927, would become known as Black Sunday in Vienna. 2 women were found dead within hours of each other. The first was Elizabeth Kramer, 31, a government clerk who worked in the Ministry of Finance. She was found in her apartment in the 3rd district by her cleaning lady. The familiar scene. A knife through the heart, a note pinned to her dress. The second was Rosa Mandel, 28, a shopkeeper who ran a small haberdashery in the 5th district. She was found in the back room of her shop by a customer who had noticed the store open but unattended. Same method. Same knife. Same note. 2 murders, committed within a 3-hour window. The killer had struck twice in one morning. Detective Inspector Richter stood in Rosa Mandel's shop, reading the note left on her body. 2 more sins erased. 2 more deceivers removed from Vienna. The purification accelerates. You cannot stop what has begun. 6 down. More to follow. The city will be cleansed. 6. 6 women dead. And the killer wasn't just continuing, they were accelerating. Richter's team moved with frantic efficiency. They processed both crime scenes simultaneously, interviewing neighbors, analyzing evidence, looking for any connection between the 2 victims. As expected, both women fit the pattern. Elizabeth Kramer had been involved in a 3-year affair with her married supervisor at the ministry. The relationship had been an open secret among her colleagues, though officially denied. Rosa Mandel had been the mistress of a wealthy textile merchant for 5 years. He'd been promising to leave his wife and marry her, but never had. Rosa had finally ended the relationship 6 months ago. 6 months. The affair had been over for half a year, but the killer still saw fit to punish her. This suggested something crucial. The killer wasn't targeting active affairs necessarily, but anyone with a history of such relationships. Which meant the potential victim pool was enormous. Every woman in Vienna who had ever had an affair with a married man, whether recently or years ago, could be on the killer's list. Thousands of potential targets. And Richter had no way to protect them all. The double murder sent Vienna into absolute panic. Women refused to leave their homes. Husbands hired private guards for their wives and daughters. The tramways, once crowded, now ran nearly empty as people avoided public transportation. Businesses suffered. The opera house saw attendance drop by half. Restaurants closed early. The killer had achieved what perhaps they'd wanted all along. They'd brought the entire city to its knees with fear. That evening, Richter sat in his office, surrounded by files, photographs, notes, evidence from 6 murders. He felt the weight of failure crushing him. 6 women dead. 6 families destroyed. And he was no closer to catching the killer than he'd been after the first murder. His partner, Detective Newman, entered with coffee and a grim expression. "The press is calling for your resignation," Newman said quietly. "I know. The commissioner is under pressure from the mayor. The mayor is under pressure from Vienna's elite. They want results. I want results too, Otto. But I can't catch a ghost." Newman sat down across from Richter. "What if we're approaching this wrong?" he said. "We've been trying to find a connection between the victims. What if the connection isn't between them, but between the killer and them?" "What do you mean?" "Think about it. The killer knows intimate details about these women's private lives. Details that aren't public knowledge. The notes mention specific aspects of their affairs. Who they were with, how long the relationships lasted, details that only someone close to the situation would know." Richter sat up straighter. "You think the killer knows the victims personally?" "Not all of them, necessarily. But the killer has access to information. Private information. The kind of information that gets shared in confessionals, or with doctors, or with the police," Richter said slowly. The thought had occurred to him before, but he'd pushed it away. Now it came roaring back. What if the killer was a police officer? Or someone with access to police files? It would explain how the killer could move through Vienna without being caught. How they could know victims' addresses, schedules, secrets. It would explain the meticulous planning, the ability to strike and vanish. Richter felt sick at the thought. But he couldn't ignore it. "We need to audit everyone who has had access to these case files," he told Newman. "Every officer, every clerk, every administrator." Quietly. "We can't let anyone know we suspect someone internal. Carl, if word gets out that we're investigating our own department." "I know. But we have to consider every possibility." The internal audit began the next day, conducted with absolute secrecy. Meanwhile, the city held its breath, waiting for the next murder. Days passed. 1 week. 2 weeks. No new victims were discovered. But on February 15th, something else arrived at police headquarters. A package. Addressed to Detective Inspector Carl Richter. Inside was a book. A ledger, actually. Bound in black leather, its pages filled with neat, elegant handwriting. The same handwriting from all the notes. Richter opened it with trembling hands. Inside were names. Dozens of names. Women's names. Each with detailed notes beside them, addresses, occupations, descriptions of their sins. It was a hit list. The killer's target list. And 6 of the names had been crossed out. The 6 women who were already dead. But there were 43 names left. 43 women marked for death. And at the front of the ledger, a handwritten note. "Dear Inspector Richter. You have worked so hard. You have tried so diligently to stop me. But you cannot. I am giving you this list as a courtesy. A professional acknowledgement of your efforts. These are the guilty. These are the women who have corrupted Vienna with their sins. I will kill them all. You can try to protect them. You can try to warn them. You can try to catch me. But you will fail. I am patient. I am methodical. I am inevitable. The purification will continue until Vienna is clean. With respect for a worthy adversary. The purifier." Richter stared at the list of names. 43 women. 43 lives in danger. And somewhere in Vienna, a killer who believed themselves unstoppable. The ledger changed everything. Detective Inspector Richter now had a list of the killer's intended victims. 43 names. 43 women who were marked for death. It was both a gift and a curse. A gift because now the police could potentially save lives by warning and protecting these women. A curse because with 43 targets, the killer could strike anywhere, at any time, and the police couldn't possibly protect everyone simultaneously. Richter made the decision immediately. Every woman on the list would be contacted, warned, and offered police protection. The logistics were nightmarish. Vienna's police force simply didn't have enough personnel to provide round-the-clock protection for 43 people. Richter requisitioned support from the federal police and even the military. Within 48 hours, officers were dispatched to locate and warn each woman on the list. Some of the women were easy to find. Others had moved. 2 had died of natural causes since the list was compiled. 1 had left Austria entirely. Of the 40 remaining women, 38 agreed to police protection. 2 refused, claiming they didn't believe they were really in danger. Richter tried to convince them, but legally, he couldn't force protection on unwilling citizens. Those 2 women haunted him. Meanwhile, the forensic analysis of the ledger itself yielded frustrating results. The paper was common stationery. The ink was standard fountain pen ink. No fingerprints, the killer had worn gloves. The handwriting analysis confirmed what they already knew: the person who wrote the ledger was the same person who wrote all the notes left at crime scenes. But it gave them no closer to an identity. Dr. Becker, the criminal psychologist, was brought in to analyze the ledger. "This is remarkable," he said, paging through the book. "Look at the level of detail. The killer has been compiling this list for years. Some of these entries are dated back to 1923. For years," Richter said. "The killer has been planning this for 4 years? At least. And look at the information. Details about where these women work, who they associate with, where they live. This required extensive surveillance. This person has been stalking these women for years. But why wait until now to start killing?" "Something triggered it," Dr. Becker said. "Some event in the killer's life that pushed them from planning to action. A personal tragedy, perhaps. A loss. Something that made the resentment finally boil over into violence. This opened a new investigative avenue." Richter's team began looking for significant events in late 1926, deaths, divorces, financial ruin, public scandals, that might have triggered someone with pre-existing resentment toward unfaithful women. They found hundreds of possibilities. Vienna in 1926 was still recovering from the economic devastation of the Great War. Families were broken. Fortunes were lost. Social structures were crumbling. Any number of people could have experienced a triggering event. Detective Inspector Richter was called to testify. He spent 3 days on the stand, methodically laying out the evidence against Stefan Kovacs. The ledger containing the target list. Stefan's journal documenting his descent into violence. The weapons found in his apartment. The testimony was damning. But the most dramatic moment of the trial came when the prosecution called Franz Kovacs, Stefan's brother, to the witness stand. Franz was a broken man. He'd lost his fiancée to his own brother's violence. The knowledge that Stefan had murdered Hermine, ostensibly to save Franz, had destroyed him. State Attorney Hartmann asked Franz to describe his relationship with Stefan. "We were close growing up," Franz said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After our parents died, Stefan looked after me. He was like a father to me. And when you told him about Hermine's past, about her previous relationship, what did he say? He told me to forgive her. He said everyone makes mistakes. He said she deserved a second chance. But he didn't believe that, did he?" Franz shook his head. "No. I know that now. He was lying to me. He'd already decided she had to die." "Did you have any indication that Stefan was capable of violence?" "No. Never. He was quiet, yes. Withdrawn after Ilsa left him. But violent? No. I never imagined. Franz broke down weeping on the stand. The sight of a man mourning both his fiancée and the brother who'd killed her was almost unbearable. Even the judge looked moved. Stefan himself sat through the trial with an expression of complete detachment. He showed no emotion during the testimony. No remorse. No anger. Nothing. It was as if he'd retreated entirely into his own mind. When Dr. Mueller called Stefan to testify in his own defense, the courtroom fell absolutely silent. Stefan took the stand calmly, almost serenely. Dar. Mueller asked him to explain his actions. Stefan's response was chilling in its simplicity. I did what God wanted me to do, he said. Vienna was corrupted. Women were destroying families, leading men into sin. Someone had to stop them. Did you feel remorse for killing these women? Remorse? No. Why would I feel remorse for doing what was right? You believe murder is right? I believe justice is right. These weren't murders. They were executions. Dar. Mueller tried to frame Stefan's responses as evidence of insanity, but Stefan's calm, rational tone undermined the argument. The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal. State Attorney Hartmann walked Stefan through each murder, forcing him to describe in detail how he'd planned and executed each killing. Stefan complied without hesitation. He described stalking Hermine on the tramway, waiting for the lights to flicker, the precise angle he'd used to stab her through the heart. He described breaking into Margarethi's apartment, waiting for her to come home, killing her quickly and efficiently. Each description was clinical, devoid of emotion. The jury looked horrified. Several spectators left the courtroom, unable to listen anymore. But Stefan continued, methodically recounting each murder as if he were describing routine tasks. When Hartmann asked if Stefan felt any regret, Stefan's response was perhaps the most damning statement of the entire trial. My only regret is that I didn't finish my work. There are still so many guilty women in Vienna. So many who deserve justice. I wish I'd had more time. The courtroom erupted in outrage. The judge had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. After 6 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for less than 4 hours. The verdict: guilty on all 6 counts of murder. The sentence: death by hanging. Austria still had capital punishment in 1927, though it was rarely carried out. Stefan showed no reaction to the verdict or the sentence. As guards led him from the courtroom, he turned to address the judge one final time. You can kill me, but you cannot kill the truth. Vienna is corrupt. Women are the instruments of that corruption. Others will see what I saw. Others will do what I did. This is not over. And with that, Stefan Kovacs was taken to prison to await his execution. The execution of Stefan Kovacs was scheduled for June 15, 1927. In the months between his sentencing and his execution, Vienna slowly began to return to normal. The women who had been on Stefan's target list gradually resumed their normal lives, though many would never fully recover from the psychological trauma of knowing they'd been marked for death. Franz Kovacs left Vienna and was never heard from again. Detective Inspector Richter was promoted to Chief Inspector, though he took no pleasure in the recognition. The case had taken a toll on him. He'd aged visibly during the investigation. His hair had gone gray. He'd developed a tremor in his left hand that never went away. In interviews years later, Richter would say that the tramway murders case taught him that evil doesn't always look like evil. Stefan Kovacs wasn't a monster in appearance. He was a quiet, ordinary man who had been wounded and had allowed that wound to fester into something monstrous. On the night before his execution, Stefan requested a meeting with Richter. Richter almost refused. He wanted nothing more to do with Stefan Kovacs. But curiosity got the better of him. The meeting took place in Stefan's cell at Vienna's Landesgericht prison. Stefan looked different. Prison had changed him. He'd lost weight. His eyes had a hollow quality. But when he spoke, his voice was the same calm, rational tone he'd maintained throughout the trial. "Inspector Richter. Thank you for coming. What do you want, Stefan?" "I wanted to tell you something. Something I didn't say during the trial." "What?" Stefan smiled slightly. "I wasn't working alone." Richter felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "I mean there was someone else. Someone who believed as I did. Someone who helped me." "Who?" "I won't tell you their name. That wouldn't be fair to them. But I want you to know that the work will continue. My death changes nothing. You're lying. Trying to cause fear even now." "Am I?" "Ask yourself, Inspector, how did I know which women to target? How did I access all those private records? How did I move through Vienna without being seen? You worked at the newspaper. You had access to Friedrich Adler's files." "Yes. But that doesn't explain everything, does it? It doesn't explain how I knew about women who never placed advertisements. It doesn't explain how I knew details about their private lives that weren't in any file." Richter leaned forward. "If you're claiming you had an accomplice, name them. Now." Stefan shook his head. "No. They're safe. They'll continue the work after I'm gone. Vienna will be purified, one sinner at a time." "You're insane." "Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm the only sane person in a city that's gone mad with moral decay." Richter stood to leave. "Wait," Stefan said. "I have one more thing to tell you." "What?" "Ilse. My fiancée. The woman who betrayed me." "What about her?" Stefan's smile widened. "She's dead. I killed her in Berlin 3 years ago. Before I ever started in Vienna. The police there never connected it to me. They thought it was a random robbery gone wrong." Richter stared at him. "You're telling me you've killed 7 women, not 6. At least 7. Maybe more." "I've been doing God's work for a long time, Inspector." Stefan laughed then. A quiet, chilling sound. "And my work will continue, even after I'm gone. Others believe. Others see the truth. The purification has only just begun." Richter left the cell without another word. He immediately contacted the Berlin police to investigate Stefan's claim about Ilse. 2 weeks later, Berlin confirmed it. Ilse Zimmermann had been found stabbed to death in her Berlin apartment. In July 1924. The case had remained unsolved. Stefan Kovacs was indeed responsible for at least 7 murders. But was he telling the truth about having an accomplice? Or was it just a final attempt to spread fear and chaos? Richter didn't know. And it haunted him. On June 15, 1927, at 6 a.m., Stefan Kovacs was hanged in the courtyard of Landesgericht prison. His last words were reported to be, "The purification continues." His body was buried in an unmarked grave. The newspapers ran headlines declaring that the tramway killer was finally dead, that Vienna could rest easy. But Richter couldn't rest easy. Because he kept thinking about Stefan's claim. About the accomplice who supposedly remained free. In the months after Stefan's execution, Richter quietly continued investigating. He reviewed every piece of evidence again. He re-interviewed witnesses. He looked for any indication that Stefan had been working with someone else. He found nothing conclusive. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that Stefan had been telling the truth. And then, in September 1927, something happened that confirmed his worst fears. A woman was found dead in her apartment in the 4th district. Her name was Clara Hoffman. She'd been stabbed through the heart with a kitchen knife. And pinned to her dress was a note. The purification continues. Stefan's work lives on. Justice never sleeps. The handwriting was different from Stefan's. But the method was identical. Richter stood in Clara Hoffman's apartment, staring at the note, and realized with absolute certainty. Stefan had been telling the truth. There was someone else. Someone who believed in Stefan's twisted mission. Someone who was continuing the murders. The nightmare wasn't over. It was starting again. The murder of Clara Hoffman sent Vienna back into panic. The newspapers screamed about a copycat killer. The public demanded to know how this could happen when Stefan Kovacs was dead. Detective Chief Inspector Richter held a press conference to address the situation. "We are treating this as a separate investigation," he told the assembled reporters. "While the method is similar to the tramway murders, we have no evidence linking this crime to Stefan Kovacs beyond the superficial similarities." But privately, Richter knew better. This wasn't just a copycat inspired by newspaper reports. The note specifically referenced Stefan. Stefan's work lives on. This was someone who had known Stefan personally. Someone who shared his beliefs. Someone who might have helped him all along. The investigation into Clara Hoffman's background revealed the now familiar pattern. She'd been having an affair with a married colleague at the insurance company where she worked. The affair had ended months ago, but in the killer's eyes, that didn't matter. Sin was sin. Punishment was required. Richter assembled a new task force, pulling in detectives who had worked on the original tramway murders case. They reviewed all of Stefan's known associates. Colleagues from the newspaper. Neighbors. Anyone Stefan had regular contact with. One name kept appearing: Friedrich Adler. Adler was the clerk at the Wiener Zeitung who had access to the personal advertisement files that Stefan had used to build his target list. Richter had interviewed Adler during the original investigation but had cleared him as a suspect because he had alibis for several of the murders. But what if Adler hadn't been the killer? What if he'd been the accomplice? Providing Stefan with information, helping him identify targets, but not actually committing the murders himself? Richter brought Adler in for another interview. This time, Richter didn't hold back. "Mr. Adler, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Did you help Stefan Kovacs murder those women?" Adler's face went pale. "What? No. Absolutely not. You had access to the files Stefan used to identify his victims. I've explained that. Stefan must have broken into my filing cabinet. Except we found no evidence of forced entry. The lock was never picked or broken. Then he must have copied my key somehow. Or you gave him access willingly." "That's ridiculous." Richter leaned forward. "A woman was murdered 3 days ago using Stefan's exact method. The note left at the scene specifically references continuing Stefan's work. That suggests someone who knew Stefan personally. Someone who shared his beliefs. It wasn't me." "You're a religious man, aren't you, Mr. Adler?" "Yes, but you've made comments in the past about the moral decay of Vienna. About women dressing immodestly, behaving improperly. Those were just opinions. Everyone is entitled to their opinions. Stefan Kovacs had opinions too. And he turned them into action." Adler stood up abruptly. "Am I being arrested?" "Not yet. But you're not to leave Vienna. We'll be watching you." Adler left the police headquarters shaking with rage and fear. Richter had detectives follow him. For 3 days, they watched Adler's movements. He went to work. He went home. He went to church. Nothing suspicious. But on the 4th day, something changed. Adler left work early and took a tram to the Vienna woods. The same area where Stefan's uncle's hunting cabin was located. Richter and his team followed at a distance. Adler walked deep into the woods, following paths that weren't on any map. Finally, he arrived at a small clearing. Another person was waiting there. A woman. Richter couldn't see her face clearly from his hidden vantage point. Adler and the woman spoke for several minutes. Their conversation appeared heated. Then the woman handed Adler something. A package of some kind. Adler took it and quickly walked back toward the city. Richter made a decision. He signaled to his team to follow Adler while he personally followed the woman. She walked deeper into the woods, eventually reaching a small cottage hidden among the trees. She entered the cottage. Richter waited 10 minutes, then approached the door. He knocked. The woman who answered was in her mid-40s, well-dressed, with an educated bearing. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Detective Chief Inspector Karl Richter, Vienna Police. I'd like to ask you a few questions." The woman's expression didn't change. "About what?" "About your meeting with Friedrich Adler just now." "I don't know what you're talking about." "I saw you. In the clearing. You gave him something." The woman studied Richter for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was a cold smile. "Familiar." She stepped aside. "You'd better come in, Inspector." Richter entered the cottage cautiously, his hand near his service pistol. Inside, the cottage was spartanly furnished but impeccably clean. On one wall hung a photograph. Richter recognized the people in the photograph immediately, Stefan Kovacs and a woman. "This woman. Who are you?" Richter asked. "My name is Greta Kovacs," she said. "Stefan was my brother." Richter felt everything click into place. Stefan had a sister. Why hadn't that come up in the investigation? "You weren't mentioned in any of Stefan's records," Richter said. "We were estranged for many years. Until Stefan found me again, about 5 years ago. He told me about Ilsa. About what she'd done to him. About his mission. His mission to murder innocent women? They weren't innocent," Greta said calmly. "They were exactly what Stefan said they were. Corrupting influences. Destroyers of families. And you helped him?" "I provided information. Names. Details. Stefan couldn't gather everything alone. I helped him understand who deserved justice." "Justice? You call murder justice?" "I call it necessary. Stefan was right about everything. Vienna is morally bankrupt. Women today have no shame, no virtue. They seduce married men, destroy homes, corrupt children. Someone needed to stop them." Richter stared at this woman who spoke of murder with the same calm tone one might use to discuss the weather. "Did you kill Clara Hoffman?" he asked. "Stefan's death doesn't end the mission. The purification must continue." "I'll take that as a yes." Richter pulled out his handcuffs. But Greta was faster. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and lunged at Richter. Richter barely dodged the blade. They struggled. Greta was surprisingly strong, driven by fanatic intensity. The knife slashed across Richter's arm, drawing blood. But Richter managed to twist her wrist, forcing her to drop the weapon. He threw her against the wall and finally got the handcuffs on. "Greta Kovacs, you're under arrest for the murder of Clara Hoffman and conspiracy in the murders committed by Stefan Kovacs." Greta laughed. "You can arrest me, Inspector. But you can't stop what we started. There are others. Others who believe. Others who will continue the work." "How many others?" "Enough. Vienna will be purified. One way or another." Richter called for backup. Within an hour, the cottage was swarming with police. They found evidence linking Greta to Clara Hoffman's murder. They also found lists of names, potential targets for future murders. And they found correspondence with multiple people across Vienna who apparently shared Stefan and Greta's twisted worldview. It wasn't just two killers. It was a network. A secret society of people who believed that women with certain moral failings deserved death. The investigation expanded massively. Over the next 6 months, police arrested 17 people connected to what the newspapers called the purification movement. Most were charged with conspiracy or accessory to murder. 3, including Greta Kovacs, were charged with actual murders. The trials lasted for years. Greta Kovacs was found guilty and sentenced to death, though her sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. Friedrich Adler was convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to 15 years. The others received various sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. But even with all the arrests, Richter couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't caught everyone. Stefan's final words kept echoing in his mind: the purification continues. The mystery remains unsolved to this day. So what can we learn from the Vienna tramway murders nearly a century later? First, that serial killers often hide in plain sight. Stefan Kovacs was a quiet, unassuming security guard. Greta was an educated woman from a respectable family. They didn't fit the stereotype of monsters. Second, that ideology can be as dangerous as mental illness. Stefan may have been disturbed, but what made him truly dangerous was the coherent belief system he built around his pain. And that belief system was persuasive enough to attract others. Third, that violence against women often stems from societal attitudes about women's sexuality and morality. The tramway murders happened in a context where women were already judged harshly for their sexual choices. Stefan and Greta simply took that judgment to its horrific extreme. Fourth, that law enforcement must be adaptable. The Vienna police were unprepared for a serial killer because such crimes were rare in 1926. They had to develop new investigative techniques on the fly. Today's police forces must remain adaptable as new forms of crime emerge. Finally, that vigilance is eternal. Stefan's final words, "The purification continues," were meant to spread fear. But they also contained a kernel of truth. There will always be people who believe they have the right to judge and punish others. Society must remain vigilant against such thinking, wherever it appears. The Vienna tramway murders remain one of the most disturbing criminal cases in European history. Not because of the body count, though 13 victims is horrific. Not because of the method, though the public nature of the killings was terrifying. But because the case revealed how easily ordinary people can be convinced to participate in extraordinary evil, if given the right ideology and the right circumstances. And that's a lesson that remains relevant today. We've reached the end of this tragic story. What did you learn from the Vienna tramway murders? How do you think society can prevent crimes like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And please, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. This global community learning from history together is incredible to see. If this case made you think, if it reminded you of the importance of vigilance against extremism and violence, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for caring enough to learn from the past so we can build a safer future. Remember the victims. Question ideology that dehumanizes others. And never forget that justice must be tempered with humanity. The Vienna tramway murders teach us that when we lose our humanity in the pursuit of what we believe is right, we become the very thing we claim to oppose. Stay safe. Stay thoughtful. And I'll see you in the next case.